Thank you. I've got one question for Julie from Twitter, so I want to make those Twitter people feel it was worthwhile sending in a question. So it's, if there are so few women wearing the burqa in Australia, why is it so much the focus of media? What are your thoughts about that?
Good question, Twitterverse. I think this is really, really essential, and that's what's being reflected in the conversations I've had with Muslim women as part of my research, is this frustration, this sense of alienation, the sense of need to self-justify, the loss of independent identity construction that comes with a media fixated with issues particularly around dress. And one of my instinctive reactions against the idea of having such a public debate and such widespread media coverage about such a minority issue, which further marginalises the most marginalised, if you like, is that as much as I value freedom of speech, and as much as I think it's the media's right and obligation to report these issues, what has tended to happen historically, and I think this is another example, is that we get hooked on a sexy issue, a ban of a piece of clothing that covers up a woman. It's dead sexy from a journalist's point of view. Okay, it's, you know, it's full of conflict and contradiction. But what it tends to do is make the women who, Shakira is one of them, who are absorbing all of this discussion, forced into a position where everybody wants to talk to them only about one thing. What do you think about the burqa? What do you think about the hijab, if that's the debate on the record? And I'm not saying we shouldn't have these discussions or that we shouldn't report them, but we need to be mindful of the impacts when we do so. And one of the things, I didn't get a chance to mention this, so I shall take the opportunity to do so now while I was talking, that has been highlighted in research around coverage of Afghanistan, is the Western media's fixation with unveiling as a symbol of liberation. Okay, now some research by a woman called Shahira Fahmy into the Associated Press photo archive found that only 1% of the photographs that were taken by AP photographers, which is a big resource for journalists worldwide, reflected this idea of women actually, you know, showing their face. So showing face or hair represented 1% of the photographs. Overwhelmingly, the women kept their burqas on, which went against, you know, the supposed justification for those wars in Iraq and Afghanistan being justified in part around, you know, this symbol of women's liberation, the removal of the burqa. What happened was, although that small percentage in reality existed in the photo archives, was that the Western media frequently used those images to tell stories about women's liberation that distorted reality. And so again, you know, this constant association. Now the concern that the Afghan women who were interviewed as part of that research expressed reflects what I've found here in Australia, and that is that the constant fixation on veiling actually shrouds the deeper issues to do with injustice and inequality, to do with violence and so on. It takes the attention off the bigger underlying issues and shorthands it to a symbol which sidetracks us in these debates. And to follow up what Dukani, I think, might have alluded to, the idea of women feeling targeted by society, partly as a result of media debates and partly as a result of such calls to ban, which has an impact on, you know, the community, which gets very heated about these issues, is that they withdraw and they retreat. Now, what worse fate can you imagine, you know, for a woman who is being forced to wear the burqa and the niqab, who is trapped in a violent situation at home, that she feels that she cannot leave that home at all? I would much rather see a society where the woman can at least exit and have the chance, you know, the opportunity to engage with other women, than the alternative, which would be to force her, whether that be through a sense of her own compunction or being compelled to do so by somebody else.
Respond to that very quickly. Well, three things, but I'll go to two. Firstly, in Afghanistan, I'm a bit confused by what you say. I think it's a very ivory tower kind of point of view about the perspective of the burqa. Having just been there, and as a media person, and I had 2 photographers with me, we came back with 5,000 photos. I used some of them up there, but most of our photos show women with their face. That's one point. When the media there is not talking about the burqa, the media there is talking about the corruption, the poverty and the fight. Women there are wearing the burqa, despite the theoretical discussion we could have at length about why the Allied forces moved in the first place. Women there are covering up because they are afraid. It is dangerous. They don't know who the person next to them is. It is as simple as that. It's not a gender issue. And one other thing I'd like to touch on, when you talk about, we're going to be confining women to their home, if we have a ban on burqa and niqab, let's keep it to burqa and niqab, we're going to confine women to their home. What about the message we're giving to their husbands and fathers that this is not acceptable in Australia? They need to sort it out, and they need to know that if their women are going to function in Australia, if they're going to go shopping, if they're going to go down the street, if they're going to go to the mosque, that they can't wear a face covering. That's something that they then have to sort out. If they're going to keep their women in prison in their homes, that's something for them to work out, and their women too. My question is, why on earth would the women be there in the first place?
Well, I think that's a very complex issue, and women who've experienced domestic violence or worked with women who've experienced domestic violence will say that's an oversimplification of the reality, that a woman may not have a choice when it comes to whether or not she is able to escape. That issue aside, I think we have to think about the implications of trying to force a man to do what you say he should do in reference to his home as they manifest for the woman herself. What's more important, the symbol or the reality?
Yes, I think there are plenty of crimes on the book relating to these situations of men not letting women do things. If he says that there'll be violence if she doesn't dress a certain way or if she tries to leave the house, well, that's against the law already. And we should be targeting those actions. We should be targeting actual manifestations of force, of intimidation, than these things which we might claim symbolise them, because they may not. And it's sort of projecting, rather, to say that the scarf is the intimidation. They're telling you have to wear it, that's the intimidation, and we can prosecute that with difficulty, as domestic violence cases are always sticky, always hard, but it's not, the difference here is ethnicity, the fundamental root issue is not.
I'm very conscious that there are lots and lots of people who ask questions, but we've got 3 more minutes, and I wanted to give our 3 generous panellists the chance just to sort of wrap up. So I do apologise that it's not been possible to take more questions, but I think the debate will continue, no doubt, on Twitter. I only discovered Twitter yesterday, so I'm going to have all my essays delivered in Twitter form, so it'll be very easy to grade them, I've decided after this. But I'm going to ask our panellists, perhaps starting with Shakira, could you just give I know it's a hard thing to do, just a very brief reflection on some of the debate that we've heard today, and perhaps wrapping it up with your own thoughts.
Yes. Well, as I said, it is difficult and awkward being forced into this defensive position, which Muslims have been forced into sort of defensive positions over a whole range of issues. And it's, it makes for some strange alliances. But it puts me in the same camp as some people whose very conservative views with regard to gender issues I don't endorse, and who are probably, I would say certainly, easily as uncomfortable at finding themselves metaphorically in bed with me. But yes, but Muslim women need to have the space to find their own comfort zone over dress as over so many other issues. And talking about prohibitions is not the way to give that space. And one of my French friends was saying that in 1989, when politicians there first started to talk about prohibitions on hijab in schools, then a lot of girls started wearing it because it was, in Bronwyn Bishop's, deathless words, an icon of defiance. Well, putting on the niqab as an icon of defiance, that's a rather more radical gesture